Now, you're not going to believe this, but this is downtown Portland. What they've done is created this great big cavernous open space where people walk around and people put up art, and I guess there are picnics and there are bands and things like that. Now look, Portland, here's what you do in the big city. We have great big open parking lots. Edmonton is an excellent example of that. Toronto used to be, until guess who wrecked it? The Reitman family had the Toronto International Film Festival building built on a beautiful open parking lot. Now, when you have these parking lots, people come downtown, they park, they walk around, they enjoy it, and there isn't all this kind of cavernous, disturbing open area in a city. So Portland, get with it. These lumpen big chunks of concrete behind me are one of the greatest symbols of modernity. They're holding up the monorail. 1962, World's Fair, Seattle. Why we don't have more of them, I don't know. They cannot be derailed because they are a monorail, unlike heavy rail or light rail commuters. These things go above everything. There's no congestion. They don't disrupt the neighborhood because you can bring in the posts. If we were going to do this project today, we'd probably have a post more like that size, carbon fiber, reinforced, much stronger, less intrusive. This is as big as SkyTrain's pillars, and they don't need to be that big. Now this is only one stop. It's 1 mile, one stop. It's quicker to walk, but it's a great demonstration project. And where does it end up? But in the wonderful Space Needle, the other great symbol of modernity in Seattle. By the way, interurban high-speed monorail is talked about by a lot of people because, again, you can't derail them. You could have dangerous goods on them. They get over and above all the rocks and trees and impediments there are between cities. And we already have a right-of-way on the interstate highway system and on the Trans-Canada Highway. We should be using it up above. Well, public art is fine, and you know you can get just too much of a good thing, as I've said, around the public art in Toronto. Developers have to pay 1% of their project's cost on public art, and that's great, but does it serve a public purpose? Would a park be better, or would a community center or a transit bus sponsor something, do something that's good for the community? But here's a piece of public art under a bridge, and yes, it is a troll, in Seattle that did a lot of public good. The story goes that this was a place for unsavory activity, drugs and sex and crime. Well, people pondered what to do. If they had a piece of public art that everybody wanted to look at, it wouldn't be as secret and private a place to do illegal things. This is public art for a public purpose in a public spot under a bridge in Seattle. Here it is, folks, the symbol of modernity from 1962, a time when everything was possible in outer space and in high technology. And all that was symbolized in the 1962 Seattle World's Fair, which was originally going to be called the Festival of the West. Well, I don't associate cowboys with high technology in Seattle and the future. I mean, maybe the gold rush, but not cowboys. Anyway, thank goodness the theme was changed. Thank goodness for the civic boosters who also wanted a Space Needle. This is wonderful. And it's also one of the great success stories in all of urban development. It was started a month too late because funding wasn't available. When it got going, it got built in about 407 days. It retired its debt in 18 months. They had to put a new pod partway up to host even more weddings and banquets and birthdays and bar mitzvahs. It's a great success story. Get one for your town. There is a big debate about whether cities become great through architecture or planning, or sometimes neither, and which one predominates. Well, okay, but I think cities also need iconic things. This is one of those iconic things that you hear rather than see. It's the 9 o'clock gun in Vancouver on Stanley Park. Now, there really is a gun there, and it is an old gun that at one time actually worked. Now it's all automated, and at 9 o'clock every night you hear that gun. Nobody's shooting anybody, it's just one of those things that you hear, like you see the jet d'eau in Geneva, or you hear the first few notes of Canada's national anthem in Montreal's port. At least you did when I was a kid. So this is one of the things that makes cities great. Something unique, different, memorable. Listen for the 9 o'clock gun. This is one of these things that we got right in a city. All the time we are tearing stuff down. You'll hear the noise in the background from construction. But on this occasion, this great, wonderful building made of steel girders and marble, almost fireproof completely, probably earthquake resistant, was built around the turn of the century as a bank. And it housed a lot of the gold from the Alaskan gold rush here in Seattle. Now, when its time had come, some people wanted to knock it down, but it's in the National Registry, so somebody decided to make it a condo. That didn't work. Someone turned it into a hotel. That works beautifully. Everybody complains. The building codes won't allow it. The fire codes won't permit it. The hallways are too narrow. The elevators don't work. All that stuff. This works beautifully, and it is great to have this building still up and used in Seattle, despite the construction around it. Well, no, I'm not in Bilbao, and this is not the Bilbao effect. It is Frank Gehry, though, and it's the EMP Music Museum in Seattle. And it's one of those wonderful wavy structures that Frank Gehry is famous for. In Bilbao, it really paid for itself many, many times over, making Bilbao a great tourist destination. This is just part of all the interesting urban sculpture and buildings and museums that there is in Seattle. So something to see at the bottom of the Space Needle and at the end of the one-stop monorail. Well, a lot of years ago in my father's time, if he had been a reporter, which he wasn't, he would have sat right here in the Spruce Goose with Howard Hughes up at the front in the controls in the only flight it ever took. A lot of other people helped him fly that plane, but he was right at the steering wheel and the controls that day. This is officially called the Hercules, but we all call it the Spruce Goose, even though it's made out of birch. No, it's not the Smithsonian or some other well-known air and space museum. This is the Evergreen I'm under the wing of the famous Hercules aircraft, better known as the Spruce Goose. It's really made out of birch, but birch doesn't rhyme with anything. This was built by Howard Hughes during World War II at a cost of about $18 million. Cost overruns took it into the 20s. Storage every year was $1 million, and it finally got rescued by the Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum in McMinnville, Oregon, about an hour south of Portland. This brings in about 100,000 people a year, brings in a couple of thousand school children doing educational programs. This is one of those civic projects you ask yourself about. Is it going to pay us back in a year or two, a decade or two, or ever, or is it going to create a synergy with other things? This is way out of town, but it seems to be working. Lots of Seattle is underground, and for good reason. Built near the water, a lot of the sewage went out, and then when the tide came in, the sewage came back, and this was causing problems. Well, one day there was a big fire, and as people were rebuilding, they thought, hey, let's make buildings fireproof the best we can with steel construction and stone, and let's fill in the streets, raise everything up. But this made the first story of many buildings underground. A lot of people kept doing business there, kept working there. You can still see the displays in their shop windows, except they're underground. And there's now an underground tour, and it's all good fun in Seattle. This kind of illustrates a point. Much of our cities are built on fill and garbage and silt and scuttled boats and all kinds of junk, and they are unstable. During a seismic event, liquefaction occurs, meaning turning the soil into liquid, and many of the buildings may actually sink like this. This is what downtown Vancouver, San Francisco, Los Angeles may look like if they survive.